Have you ever found yourself thinking, I knew that was going to happen? Or maybe, if only I had made a different choice, things would be so much better now. Well, you're not alone. This is a phenomenon known as hindsight bias, and it's one of the key reasons we often feel regret. But is it possible to eliminate regret from our lives? Can understanding this cognitive bias help us make peace with our past decisions? The reason we often think we could have made better choices is because of a phenomenon called hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is a psychological phenomenon where people believe, after an event has happened, that they knew it all along. Essentially, once we know the outcome of a situation, our brain tricks us into thinking that the result was more predictable than it actually was. Hindsight bias is a tendency to think that we were right about predicting an event's outcome even when we were wrong. Hindsight bias takes the common form of I knew it all along. The prefrontal cortex and hippocampus are the most critical parts of the human brain for decision making. These areas are implicated in hindsight bias. For example, imagine your short-lived romantic partner breaks up with you out of the blue. After the breakup, you might say, I knew they were going to break my heart. But in all seriousness, did you really? Or are you simply saying that because now you have had the chance to analyze the relationship? Here's another example. Imagine you're watching a sports game and your team loses. After the game, you might say, I knew we were going to lose. But did you really know? Or are you just saying that because you now have all the information about how the game unfolded? This is hindsight bias in action. It gives us a false sense of confidence in our ability to predict outcomes, making us think that we should have known better, leading to those all too familiar feelings of regret. The phrase hindsight is 2020 is a common response to regret. It means that it's easy to see and understand the mistakes or correct decisions of the past when looking back, because you now have full knowledge of the outcome. The expression draws from the idea of perfect vision 2020 in an eye test, suggesting that when reflecting on past events, everything seems clear and obvious, much more so than it was when the decisions were being made. Essentially, when you're in the moment, you're dealing with uncertainty and incomplete information. But in hindsight, since you know what happened, it feels as though the best choice should have been clear all along. This can lead to hindsight bias, where we overestimate our ability to have predicted or prevented a certain outcome. But why does hindsight bias matter when it comes to regret? Well, because when we convince ourselves that we should have known better, we tend to blame ourselves for the outcome. And that's where regret kicks in. Regret is often tied to the belief that we could have made a better choice if only we had had more insight or been more aware. Hindsight bias fuels this by distorting our perception of the past. After something goes wrong, whether it's a failed relationship, a missed opportunity, or a bad financial decision, we look back and convince ourselves that the red flags were obvious, that we should have known. In reality, we're rarely in possession of all the facts when making decisions, but hindsight makes us think otherwise. It leads to a skewed interpretation of past events, where we focus on what we know now and overlook the complexity and uncertainty we faced in the moment. This can create a painful loop of self-criticism. I should have done things differently, or how could I have been so blind? But really, you couldn't have predicted the outcome with certainty. You were just making the best decision you could with the information you had at the time. This is why hindsight bias is so deeply connected to regret. It convinces us that we had the ability to foresee and avoid negative outcomes, even when we didn't. The result? We blame ourselves, often unfairly. The big question: is it possible to eliminate regret from our lives? Well, before we answer that, let's acknowledge something important. Regret is a universal human emotion. We have all experienced it at some point, and to some degree, it serves a purpose. Regret can help us reflect, learn from our mistakes, and make better choices in the future. It's a part of our growth. However, chronic or excessive regret, when we get stuck in the past, can be harmful. It can keep us from enjoying the present and lead to feelings of guilt, depression, or anxiety. The good news is, while we may not be able to eliminate regret entirely, we can definitely reduce its grip on our lives by understanding and mitigating hindsight bias. So, how do we do that? First, we have to accept that our decisions are made with incomplete information. No one has a crystal ball, and we're all just doing the best we can with what we know at any given moment. Second, we have to practice self-compassion. It's easy to beat ourselves up over what we didn't see, but it's far more helpful to treat ourselves with kindness and acknowledge that we're only human. Third, we can shift our focus from what could I have done differently to what can I learn from this. Regret doesn't have to be a dead-end emotion. If we reframe it as an opportunity for growth, it can become a tool for self-improvement rather than self-criticism. And finally, mindfulness. The more present we are in the moment, the less likely we are to obsess over past decisions. Practicing mindfulness can help us let go of regrets by grounding us in the present, where we can take actionable steps forward. Now, this doesn't mean that eliminating regret is easy, but it's possible to significantly reduce its impact by challenging hindsight bias and adopting these healthier habits. Let's look at a real-life example of how you can apply these steps. For instance, you might regret not pursuing your dream job earlier in life. You may tell yourself, I knew I should have taken that opportunity when I had the chance, but when you reflect more deeply, you may realize that you were not in the right place emotionally or financially to take that risk at the time. Or maybe you regret not saving more money when you were younger. You think to yourself, I knew the importance of saving, so why didn't I do it? But hindsight bias oversimplifies your financial reality at the time. Maybe you were dealing with debt, supporting family, or did not have the education or tools to manage your money properly. By recognizing that you did the best you could with the resources you had, you can move forward, free of regret, and start making better financial decisions today. Regret is an inevitable part of life, but it doesn't have to control us. By understanding hindsight bias and how it skews our perception of the past, we can start to let go of unnecessary regret. We can learn to accept our past decisions with grace, knowing that we were doing the best we could at the time. So, is it possible to eliminate regret entirely? Maybe not. But can we reduce its impact on our lives? Absolutely. And the first step is to challenge that little voice in your head that says, you should have known better. Because, in truth, none of us have all the answers. And that's okay. Thank you for watching. And remember, be kind to yourself, learn from the past, and keep moving forward. You've got this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.